Did everybody have a good week and weekend?
I just did homework the whole time.
Good for you.
Nothing bad happened though, so it could have been worse.
That's always good. It's a funny world that we live in where it's a good thing when we say nothing bad happened. That is pretty positive. I am recording, so Whitney, please be careful that you don't swear at all. Do you guys have anything fun planned for next week? I anticipate a number of families having knockdown, drag-out arguments because of the recent election. I'd be willing to bet that come Friday, there's going to be some really upset people. And then come Monday, they'll come back to their senses and apologize to each other. All righty. There is, Alison submitted the first peer critique. So I want to look at that and remind people about that. I want to look at some of the Readymades again and talk about those, answer any questions that people have, see where people are at. And that video, I really want your comments on it. Again, if you guys are able to turn in the peer and self-critiques by the end of Thanksgiving weekend, everybody who does that will get extra credit. All right. And I'm pausing a bit because I am trying to pull up some things that for whatever reason the system does not want to show me the it doesn't want to show me the screen, so it's taking a while to pull it up. That's a little frustrating. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the discussions, you know, what's required in the discussions. Because we're going to have like one more big discussion at the end, and I want people to be very comfortable with the tools of artistic critique. Do you folks remember there's 4 tools, there's 4 of us here. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, Jocelyn, Christina, and Whitney, I'm going to call on each of you to answer for one of these questions. But the 4 steps of artistic critique. What is the first step? I'd like a volunteer.
Describe.
Describe. And what are you doing when you describe the object? What are you talking about?
Talking about the form, shape, color, just like the characteristics without going into further depth or like analyzing things.
No, that is absolutely perfect. Excellent. Very good. That's precisely it. And when you do your peer and self-critiques, that's going to take anywhere from 45 seconds to a minute or so. And you can go on a little bit longer than that. I honestly did not expect any of these critiques to be more than 5 minutes. Do you guys remember the nightmare I shared with you? How long that one was?
30 minutes, is that what you said?
Yeah, it was over a half an hour. And it reminds me of, I don't know how familiar you guys are with LDS culture, but when a young person goes on their voluntary ministry, they usually will speak at church for a bit, and it's about a 12-minute presentation. But I knew a guy who made a bet with his friend that he could cut into Sunday school, and they wanted to see how long it was going to be. And he ended up giving a talk that was over 50 minutes long, and at the end he closed with something like, yeah, I guess I won the bet. And it was just an experience that nobody wants to endure when they go to church. That's not what church is for. Hopefully. I have some Quaker friends, and they said that is definitely not what church is for. But 5 minutes tops, 3 to 5 minutes is just exactly right. And what Jocelyn just described is perfect for the description. Okay, Christina or Whitney, what is the second tool?
Analysis.
Yes, excellent. And what do you do when you analyze the object?
You discuss maybe what techniques were used or what materials were used, how the artist accomplished what they accomplished.
Yes, excellent. Very good. So Jocelyn is talking about what in the describe. Christina is talking about how in the analysis. And Whitney, what's the third step?
Interpretation.
Yes, excellent. And what do you do when you interpret the object?
You explore the meaning behind the piece and applying your own personal perspective on it as well.
I'm sorry, I was wondering why I couldn't hear people very well, but it was because I turned the sound way down. Is that better? Can you guys hear me better?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yes, Whitney, you're exactly right. That's exactly right. And really good critiques, the person will do, will try to either extrapolate the artist's point of view or read what they can about what the artist has done. That's going to be difficult when we're doing peer critiques. But do you think that you can extrapolate some of what the artist's intention is just by looking at their work?
Usually, I think you can get a hint at it. Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Whitney, if you're talking about looking at the at somebody else's work or even your own, how long do you think that would take in one of these short videos?
I would say probably longer than analysis, and I'm blanking on and description. So probably like a minute or two.
Yeah, I think you're right, because you can that's a good opportunity for you to talk about why you think things mean the way that they do. You know, talk about, for example, application of cultural color theory, which I like using words like that because it makes it sound really super smart. But what you're just saying is, blue usually means that people are calm. But yeah, Whitney, that's a great answer. And any of the three of you, just tell me, what is the fourth and final step?
Evaluation or judgment.
Yes, excellent. And that's when you determine whether or not the thing was successful. And this is, I phrase it that way. It sounds like it's a yes or no question, but it really isn't. Because something can be really successful for an assignment, for example, but definitely not for a masterwork. It's not going to be the finest thing you've ever done in your entire life up until that point, but it's going to be really good and solid because it meets the requirements of the assignment. So, and maybe something is going to be successful because it looks like it's worthwhile and somebody likes it. And if somebody else responds to it, then it's successful in that way as well. So yeah, excellent. You guys really demonstrate a good handle on this. Now, when Whitney is talking about interpretation, there is something that I want you to remember, really, really grind it into your brain so you remember it. To begin with, I'm just going to ask you a question that the answer is going to be at the tip of your brain, as it is for all artists. Who is your worst critic?
I think always ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And we are our own worst critic, not because our stuff is crap. That has nothing to do with it. But because we are growing while we're creating the art. So every single moment that we're working on something, our brains are clicking along and we realize, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that, or I could have done this instead. I could do it better next time. And we're constantly evaluating our own effort in the frame of reference that we are going to improve it for next time. And that's fine. That's what we do. I mean, we can't help that as artists. But the problem is when we start interpreting or even evaluating something from that frame of mind, we are comparing what we have done to what we could do in the future. And that's terrible. We are if you are the artist doing that to your own work, that is the only time it happens. I mean, it's not going to happen if you're critiquing anybody else's work. And the reality is, if you take that frame of reference, whatever you've done is never going to feel like it's complete or good enough. And I think that's completely unfair, because just like every other work or artist that we encounter, when we evaluate what we see for what it is, we need to do that same thing with our own work. So when you do a self-critique, I want you to pretend that it is not yours and that you've never seen it before. Get into that state of mind before you start recording your analysis, your critique. And what you will see, and you may have to try this a couple times before you start recording, but what you will see is that you are going to be a lot more fair about what you've done. We are our own harshest critics, because everything we see, everything we've done, we are always looking at it in the frame of reference, in the frame of mind that we will be doing better in the future. And like I said, that isn't fair. We have to train ourselves to look at something. And this is, every time we want to improve on something, look at it simply as it is right now, not in comparison to what you're going to do to it in the future. Do you guys understand the difference?
Yeah.
Good. And what I guarantee will happen when you do that to your own work, you will like it a lot better. All of you guys are professional artists. All of you guys do exceptional work. Problematic encounters happen when we're trying to follow parameters for an assignment, or when we're in a rush. And it has no reflection on you or your value as an artist. When you critique your own work, you have to give yourself the same kind of credit you do anybody else. And I'm sorry, I've repeated myself about 4 times, but it's important that this lesson is remembered by everybody. And I want you to think about this as well. Do you guys remember what I said a synonym for perfection is? What is the correct synonym for perfection? Do any of you remember when we talked about that about a month and a half ago?
I am trying to remember and I can't.
Okay, we think, because we're artists, and all of us artists have neuroses, we can't help it. I read an article last week where it said 3 out of 5 Americans deal with neurotic behavior and neuroses all the time, and it led me to the conclusion that 3 out of 5 Americans must be artists. But one of those neuroses leads us to the false belief that perfection is synonymous with the phrase, "It can't get any better." We can't improve on it. And that simply is not true. We will always be able to improve on something, because that word improve is a shifting target. I mean, it changes with whims, it changes with our own experience level. What perfection actually means is a synonym for whole or complete. If you have finished an assignment, you have crafted it well, you've done your best to follow the parameters. If you have finished the assignment, is it perfect?
Yes.
Yes. If you have followed all the parameters. Now, so when I see something and some parameters haven't been followed, or the person didn't craft it thoroughly or correctly, I'll say something, and they go back, finish it, and make sure that it's crafted properly, and they fill the parameters. They get a perfect score, because then the object is perfect. Do you guys understand what I'm communicating?
Yeah.
Okay. This is really important. If we as artists allow ourselves to start running down that hallway of self-flagellation because nothing we do is good enough, that cripples us in our creative capacity. What is a lot better to do is when we finish something, we can step back from it, divorce ourselves from it, pretend that it's the first time we've ever seen it, apply the tools of artistic critique, and then that gives us a fair assessment of the kinds of things we actually should be changing, what we can improve on. And the reason why that is different is the sliding scale of what can be done is narrowed down quite a bit because we're focusing on what has already been done, not constantly berating ourselves because next time we'll do it better. And I know I've said it several times. I think I've reiterated that about 8 or 9 times, but it is absolutely vital that everybody understands that. What is a big problem for me when I am designing a set of windows for somebody, I am constantly asking myself, will they like it? Will they like this? Will they like that? I'll be upset at myself because I haven't done drawn the cuts correctly. I haven't done this or that, or maybe I haven't applied the colors correctly. And I've got to and I have to remind myself consciously to stop, take a step back, look at whatever I've designed, and then re-examine it in the light of what the customer wanted. Then I'm not comparing myself to this constantly shifting, ever improving future self. I'm comparing myself to the parameters of what's needed. And that I think that is really difficult to begin doing. But once we're able to do it as artists, and we're able to use our big words, our grown-up words, to articulate the different factors that go into applying the application of the tools of artistic critique, if we're able to do that, it makes us a lot better artists, and it makes us a lot more professional. And it doesn't sound like we're whining anymore, which is really good. But something else to think about. Over Thanksgiving, you guys are probably going to be encountering friends and family who may or may not be brave enough to ask you why you're wasting time being an artist and why don't you apply yourself and work after getting a real job. What you can do is use the vocabulary you're honing during your experience with critique. For example, instead of walking into your family's home and looking around and trying to give them a compliment about how the decorations, instead of saying, oh, this is pretty, you could say something along the lines of, I love the fact that you've cared enough about making your home a welcoming space for everybody that you've decorated. And I love the rhythm you set up with the use of the specific color palette that feels very warm and inviting. I think this is just really engaging, and it makes me feel like I've been wrapped in a big blanket. That sounds a lot better than, oh, hi, Mom. So something to think about. The other thing is the tools of artistic critique, they don't just apply to art, they will apply to absolutely any situation. And you replace the art with the situation. You'll describe the situation, analyze by discussing how it got to where it is, then interpret what's actually going on and what those things may mean, and then evaluate whether or not this particular situation is successful or what you can do to remedy it. So it applies to everything. Anyway, all right. I hope that I've beaten that with a stick enough that everybody gets what's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, good. So, how long have you guys been professional artists? Each of you. Jocelyn, how long have you been an artist?
Um, I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't know if I necessarily consider myself a professional artist. But I loved art for a long time, so.
Okay, well, if you're attending training that you have to pay for, that is part of being a professional as well. So um, that I think being a student counts as well because you are accountable for what you're doing. How about you, Whitney? How long have you been a professional artist?
I've always really liked art. I've been in school for art for about 2 years. Before that, I used to do, I had my own photography business for a couple years. So since like 2017, I guess.
Okay, good, excellent. How about you, Christina?
I took, some art classes in high school in the 90s and then had a long time without really doing any kind of formal art, but I've always loved to make. Um, and then I've come back to school to study art about 3 years ago.
Okay, good. I wanted to share a book with you guys. This has really nothing to do with the class, but I found there's several books I could recommend, but I really like this one, and I think it's completely worth looking at. If you guys can get a hold of it, I think the paperback is $23. I don't think it's available as an Amazon. I mean, as a Kindle book. No, it's not. But I want to share it with you. It is a really good book. Hold on just a second here. Okay, it's a collection of essays put together by a person named Brian Keeble, and the title "Every Man an Artist" is actually from a medieval era treatise on the arts. Have any of you heard of somebody named Theophilus?
No.
I'm gonna okay. I was gonna bet that you guys have no idea who that is, but I'll show you his book too. This is available in Kindle. Theophilus was a medieval monk who went around Europe and just visited with people in each of the different guilds. Uh, Guilds were pretty serious stuff at this time in Europe, and still they are pretty serious, but serious enough that the punishment for betraying a guild's secrets was worse than corporate espionage today. And since Theophilus was a monk, he could get away with talking with all these different guilds, and he recorded in his journal how they did different things. And the reason why that is interesting is I came across this book, and then I came across Brian Keeble's book, and he's talking about something that Albrecht Dürer wrote about uh, as well. But this title comes from a treatise that was written about the same time that Theophilus was alive. So it's medieval era Europe. But the idea is, these are a collection of essays that are discussions about what makes art art. And it's fascinating because if for anybody who says, "Oh, I'm not an artist," or "I don't consider myself an artist," or you don't feel really confident about calling yourself an artist, I would recommend coming across reading these two books. You can check them out. Most libraries will have copies, and if the campus library doesn't have a copy, you can use interlibrary loan and bring them in. But I think they're really good and solid. Albrecht Dürer's essay, you might be able to find it online. I check every couple of years. The only time I've or the only place I've seen it was actually a collection of self-reflections by Albert Dürer, as well as his art, that was published about 80 years ago in both English and German. And just an incredibly cool book, where he talks quite a bit about what it means to be an artist. So I recommend those. Anyway, going on. So remember, when you do your self-critique, and all three of you are going to have this done by the end of Thanksgiving weekend for sure. But when you do the self-critique, step back and pretend that this is the first time you've ever seen the thing that you're critiquing. And remember, all the peer and self-critiques must be done on objects created in this class, which is why we have those discussions. So you can see images of what other people have made. And again, it's only one peer critique and one self-critique. So I wanted to both share with you one of the discussions that we did, because the final discussion, people are going to be talking about the great combination sculpture we're going to be finishing before the end of the term. But before we do that, I want to share with you a peer critique that is done by somebody in this class. So, and then after we watch it, we'll talk about it. All right. So let's see. Okay, now can all three of you see this image?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. All right, great.
Today, I will be doing an artistic critique on this volumetric sculpture by Kensley Readymades. This is an abstract sculpture of a butterfly that uses the same gray color with the wire. Because we only had that one material for this assignment, it's only that one gray color of the wire. The line on this sculpture has a lot of curvature, and texture is created in the areas with more wire intertwined around it. So for example, the centerpiece, and then there's specific parts on the wings that you can see there's more wire added to it. For this critique, I will provide the two different photographs that Kenzie was able to take of her butterfly to demonstrate how you can identify many different parts of it based on the angle that is facing you. The first thing that I notice about this piece are the details on the wings with the extra intertwined wire. This adds a lot of interest to this piece. And the overall effect of this piece is creating interest through the different patterns and textures built within. She has created an exciting and stimulating art piece and mood with her line quality and her subject matter of her piece that she decided on. There is emphasis on the centerpiece of the butterfly with the repetition of wire continuously wrapped in that specific area. And like mentioned before, we can also see that in the wings on certain parts in the center of the wings and on the outsides. We can also identify balance in the wings with the symmetrical patterns present there. If you were to split the butterfly in half, you can see that each side is relatively the exact same. The choice of the wire helps to create the effect of a line drawing, but having it being made into that 3D design. This work was created for our volumetric form assignment, and we have access to it through our volumetric discussion. It looks like Kensley posted it on the discussion page on September 24th. And I was really drawn to her piece because I liked that her subject matter was something beautiful and that she was still able to create that effect even with the material of using wire. The two different angles are so interesting to me, and I'm glad that she was able to accomplish photographing both of these different angles because it allowed for differentiation while also allowing her piece to be unified at the same time. Kensley has also created a butterfly, and from that, I have inferred that part of the reason is that she has an interest in butterflies, and or she thought it was a beautiful thing to create. And after doing this critique, I have more appreciation for all the hard work and the details that Kensley put into her sculpture. This is a beautiful work of art, and I think she did a great job in creating it.
All right. Going to stop sharing that. What did you guys think about that critique?
I thought it was great. It was not so long that you started to want it to end. I thought she made valid points about the piece, and I thought she was positive and upbeat, and it was nice.
All right, great. Jocelyn or Whitney, could you tell where she applied each of those 4 tools of artistic critique?
She did a great job at describing what it looked like and then talking about the materials and the way she thought she used the material, and then talking about, my goodness, I cannot think right now. And then thinking about what the meaning behind it was, and I think she did a good job at hitting all of the 4 points.
All right, great. What did you think, Jocelyn?
Yeah, it was easy to distinguish the points of the artistic critique that she was hitting. At the moment, she kind of like clued viewers in to what she was going to be talking about as well. So it made it really easy to distinguish those separate parts.
All right, excellent. And like I appreciate 2 points that Christina brought out. One is it wasn't so long you wanted it to end, and the second, or end right away. And the other was that she stayed consistently positive. And Whitney and Jocelyn, both the points that you bring out that you talk about, I think are really make this a good example. It's the first critique we have in the class, and it happens to be well done as well. I wanted to share with you as a short video. It will be attached in today's what's it called? Attendance thing, and the attendance requirements for today will be the same as last week, where you'll say 4 things about our time together and 1 thing about the video we watch. The reason why I'm saying that and saying that I'll do it separately is that sometimes YouTube will force me to edit that out when we upload these. Even though I've been given permission to use them, YouTube sometimes will force me to edit them out when we upload it onto our class channel. But this video I'm going to share with you is a video where 2 art professionals are describing, it's Dr. Beth Harris and Dr. Stephen Zucker are describing Henry Moore's reclining figure, and they are applying those 4 tools of artistic critique. So it's only about 6 minutes. As we watch it, look for those 4 different tools. Describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. And you'll notice that they go through in a pretty good, solid order, but then they start talking about it quite a bit, and they dip into the different tools out of sequence. And that's perfectly fine. It doesn't make any difference. But listen for their use, and we'll talk about it after we watch the video.
Describing something can seem very straightforward, but in fact, describing a work of art can take time and should take time, because the more you describe something, the more you understand what you see and the closer you'll get to interpreting what you see. So this is why describing is one of those first skills that art historians learn.
And really, anybody who goes to the museum should have conversations about what they see and the associations that it brings to mind, in addition to pure description.
So here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to talk about when the sculpture was made. We're not going to talk about the historical context. We're not going to talk about the artist's biography. We're only going to describe what we see.
I see a human body, and it's large, one that's abstracted, that's not a careful rendering of human anatomy.
I see what look like arms and legs and a reclining figure.
There's no question that we immediately recognize the legs, the knees, the torso, the elbows, the neck. But the more that we look at those individual parts of the body, the more that we see the choices that the artist has made, the more we recognize that this is not an actual elbow. That's not really a neck. That's not really a head, but we still see it that way.
And most obviously, what makes this not really a body is the giant cavity, that giant open space where we expect to see a torso.
But before we begin to describe the individual elements of the sculpture, I think it's also important to make a few observations about the material and the surface. The sculpture is a dirty white, and it's so smooth that it invites us to touch it, even though the museum would rather we didn't.
Well, it does have these lovely curvilinear forms that feel like they would be very pleasurable to touch. But there's also a way in which that dirty ivory color feels like bone, feels organic.
And that's complicated because bones are on the inside, but what we're seeing is the outside. Or is this a fossil? Has the flesh been removed? Except that the figure seems animated. It seems as if it's still intact.
As we look closer, we see forms that seem to be missing. Hands, or at least fingers, feet, and parts of the body also seem to be duplicated. What read to me as breasts occur in two places in the sculpture. What read to me as hips occurs in two places in the sculpture.
So we can't be too literal at any point. You said a moment ago that there are no fingers, but there's a reference to fingers. That is, the fingers have been abstracted. If you look at the figure's left hand, it seems to be a fist with its fingers curled in, described by an oval of string that's embedded in the surface.
Nevertheless, the artist has decided not to give us individual fingers. He's decided not to give us an ankle and a foot with toes and an arch in it.
But that is still a foot. Because of the angle at which the leg ends, I get the sense of a heel, of toes, and I get the sense of where the ankle would be. It's as if the artist is inviting me to fill in what he's left out.
In a way, the negative space, the space between the forms, feels just as substantial as the forms themselves. That space where the torso should be, which is empty, the way that what reads as the spine or the upper back is uplifted as the form seems to support itself on its elbows, that lovely negative space that gives us a sense of lifting up of the upper body.
And because of that lifting up, not only on the elbows and the forearms, but also on these other indeterminate limbs, I get the sense that this is not only human. It's a different kind of creature, almost an insect that could move forward on all fours or perhaps all sixes.
There's also a tension between the soft, organic, rounded forms and these straight lines that seem to draw our attention to a breast, an elbow, a shoulder.
A contour. This is drawing on form. Granted, when I look at this sculpture, I can't help but think of the human body. But I also have a sense that I'm looking at a landscape, that the knees are distant mountains, that somehow this is a unity of human form and the earth itself.
It's so funny that you say that, because when I see this sculpture, I immediately imagine a figure on a beach. So I didn't just imagine a reclining figure. I imagined the natural location of this figure outside.
Sunbaked.
In fact, lifting up to catch the rays of the sun.
The almost cushion-like form in the center of the sculpture that can be read simultaneously as a chest, as breasts, perhaps as a torso, as an indeterminate form, creates for me a feeling It is the feeling that I have when I arch my back. When I look at this sculpture, I feel that pulling in my body. And so the artist has used the simplest of tools. He's used form itself. He's used the line that he's constructed with string. And he's able to create in me an association and a physical memory.
Some views of the sculpture feel very recumbent and languorous, where others have a sense of tension. If we look at what reads as the head, we see two circular forms with an indentation in the center that read as an eye, and that open mouth that seems to be yearning and even almost crying.
So we've spent only a few minutes looking at this sculpture, but we've developed a whole set of associations. We've matched words with what we're seeing, and those words have created a foundation for our own personal interpretation. And I find that if I spend time describing, if I spend time looking closely, even a work of art that at first seemed difficult and confusing, that perhaps I didn't like at first glance, this changes, and an appreciation for what the artist achieved begins to develop.
I really like that conversation. I like hearing those people talk about that stuff. What are some of the things that you noticed hearing that conversation, and as they were talking about the object, Henry Moore's reclining figure? Could you guys tell when they shifted in between the 4 steps of artistic critique? Did they use all 4 of those steps, or all 4 of the tools?
I think they did. Yes.
Yeah, I think they did. I liked at the beginning when they said, it invites you to touch, and then they had the little declarative statement, never touch artwork in a museum unless you're explicitly directed to do so. That I like that. But yeah, you could tell sometimes, like when they were talking about when they started getting into the interpretation, what it could mean, they kept referring to the material. They kept referring to the lines of string, how that made them feel, how they responded to it, and how in turn that directed them to their interpretation. And I really like that example. I think it's an excellent example to follow as you do your critique. So remember that, and as you do this, as you get ready to do your own peer critiques, refer to that video. Again, I will link it in the attendance assignment for this week, and you will need to do, for full 5 points on your attendance, you'll need to list 4 things that, from our discussion in regular class time, and then one thing from that video. And so if it is clipped out of the recording of our class time, I will put a link on it, or a link to it, in the attendance box, so you can watch it as well. One of the points that I think are really important, I mentioned earlier using our grown-up vocabulary. Or I have 5 daughters, and I always call it the big girl vocabulary. We're staying away from words like neat or pretty, and we are applying words that have more depth to them. Do you remember about a month, almost 2 months ago now, I was talking about the word blue, for the color blue, did not occur in written literature in the West until about the 4th or 5th century BC, and it first shows up in writings by Homer. Do you guys remember me talking about that?
Yeah.
Do you think that blue existed as a color before then?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. But when we start using words, well, the kindness and gentleness of the Nazi philosophers, Heidegger, talks about words as being both empowering and restrictive. They're empowering in that they allow us to channel our thoughts and give direction to them, but they're restrictive because once we commit to a word, we can't use others. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. And in fact, most of the time, I think it's not a bad thing. But as we use words to catalog our thoughts and express our thoughts, that also creates paths of thinking and helps us to direct our thinking. So when we start using words like repetitive or rhythmic, what we are talking about is adjusting our thinking to not just start seeing those things better, but to be able to communicate those things better. Now, one of the things that they said as well is that if somebody has taken the time to create art, it is worth it to take the time to appreciate it. And they didn't use exactly those words, but I really like that perspective. I think it was Clement Greenberg. He was an art critic in the 50s. I believe it was him who said, if you don't get it after the first moment of observation, it's just not worth getting. I think that's completely wrong. If we don't get it in the first second of observation, what that means is we need to pause for a sec, pay attention to what we're looking at, and then start visualizing words to help us get into the frame of mind to actually start seeing it. When you use simple words to describe something, a lot of the times those simple words allow your brain to dismiss what you're seeing. When you use precise words, you engage your thinking in a process of trying to extrapolate what the best word is, which forces your brain to really examine something. And that's why I think vocabulary is such an important thing. One of the mandates for this class, 1130, is to increase your descriptive and communicative vocabulary to be more precise as you critique art. And I think that is a really valuable lesson to learn when you're discussing about other art, but it is incredibly valuable when you're working with your own work. And I'm just, for an example, if you are creating something and you get frustrated with it and you don't know why, and this happens to every artist all the time, every day, can't help it. What you can do is take a step back, pretend that you've never seen it before, start applying mentally the 4 steps of artistic critique, or those 4 tools, and then somewhere along the line, that issue that is bothering you as to why it's not working, you'll be able to articulate that because you've stepped back and you're not emotionally invested anymore. And by being able to articulate it, you can either fix it on that project or make sure that you fix it on future projects. So this is invaluable in several different ways. And again, the reason I'm talking about all this is that we are preparing to do our self and peer critiques in the next couple of weeks. I wanted to, we're going to go to an image. I don't have the image, and that's not important, but I do want to look at the comments that are made. And this is for the discussion that was we did a couple weeks ago for the carved biomorphic abstraction. And we're going to look at this one, and we're going to flip through and look at a couple others as well. Okay, in this assignment, what you needed to do is submit an image of your own thing, and then after other people submitted their work, you make very specific comments. And I mentioned in the description that you need to begin to apply the tools of artistic critique in your comments. I think that in this first one, interesting is an excellent word to use. Flow is a great word to use. And these aren't just words, and I'm not saying that because they sound good, but when you use these words, it forces you to actually engage with what you're seeing as well. And it disproves Clement Greenberg's assertion. This one, she talks about, it makes me feel I'm in space or in a cartoon. I really like that because it's becoming very personal. I'm talking about so smooth, lovely pattern and repetition that I enjoy, and as I view it up and down again, I really like that because what they're sharing is what they've observed as well as their interaction with it. And this one, the person is not being critical, saying principles of biomorphic abstraction have been followed well, but some edges may need to be rounded. They're addressing that question of evaluating, that tool of evaluating, and this becomes helpful. You're not being critical, you're not being harsh. And I think that is really good. And I love the inclusion of two holes within your shape. It adds some nice interest. Excellent, because that directly ties into some of the principles we've been talking about in the class, where you're also precisely describing, or this person is precisely describing why it attracts their interest. And using words like organic and smooth. We talked about all those different words for describing texture. And if it still feels natural. So these kinds of comments I think are really indicative of the application of these tools to what we're observing. Does that all make sense as to why precise language has a relationship with understanding or appreciation?
Yeah.
Okay. Could somebody articulate what that relationship might be? How do words impact what we are thinking about, what we're seeing, or even what we see?
I think that the words that we choose show that we take the work that the artist has done seriously, and that we respect their time and skill that went into creating this piece.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when we get into the habit of respecting the work of other people, hopefully then that will rub off and allow us to respect the work that we do ourselves. One of the mandates, one of the rationale behind the mandates for the work logs is the department leadership recognizes that a lot of artists take their own time and work for granted. And when we are going into the professional sphere, we've got to be confident enough that we can honestly charge for our time and our effort. There's a story I came across. I don't think it's entirely apocryphal because I've read it from a number of different stories or a number of different sources, is that a woman who was visiting overseas thought she recognized Pablo Picasso in this cafe that she was visiting. And she went over, and sure enough, it was Pablo Picasso. So she brought a napkin and a pen to him and said, "I'll pay whatever you want. Could you scribble something for me?" So he looked at the paper for about 2 minutes, and then he scribbled something really quick, handed it to her, and said, "That's $10,000. And she was aghast and said, "But it only took you a second." And Pablo Picasso said, "Yes, but it took me 60 years to get to that second." And I think he was demonstrated that he did value his own work and his own time and his own expertise. And by being able to use tools of articulation, for example, and showing respect for other people's work, hopefully that allows us to show respect for our own work. And as we keep track of our time, we realize that our time is valuable. And I think that all in all, it helps us to become a little bit more focused and better as artists as well. Now, I wanted to, we have seen some of these before, but I wanted to go through and just share with everybody some of the ready-mades that people looked at, if that's what, or do you guys have any questions or comments on the stuff that I've just gotten done talking about several times?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Are we good to move on?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, good. What I want to do now is look at some of the ready-mades and some of the cocoon projects, just to see where people are at and what people have done. Let's see. Give me just a second here. All right. So we're going to look at some of the ready-mades first, and then we're going to look at some of the cocooning. All right. I believe we saw this one last week, the bananagrams. And at first, the title, I thought this was the title, but this is the title, bananagrams, right here. And I like what this person has done because they presented a rather formalist photograph, and then their 3 paragraphs talk about what it is and why it's art, why it should, how the new presentation is art. And that's what we need to do with the ready-mades. The ready-mades, the fountain is not the first ready-made that Marcel Duchamp did. I think it's the second or third, but it was the first one that really blew people's minds and offended a lot of folks. Reading some of the articles that were published when the fountain, can any of you guys say really quick what Marcel Duchamp's fountain was? Can you describe it?
It was a urinal, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. And he displayed it in a gallery on a pedestal as if it was a sculpture.
It still makes me angry.
What is reading what people at the time said about it, the first showing, somebody actually fainted. There were actually a couple women who fainted because they were so offended. And so what we're looking at is these images where somebody has presented an object, a found object, in a completely new context, and then described why it means what they're saying it means, why they're presenting it. And I love reading what people have written, and I love the titles that people are giving to it. And for the most part, it seems like people really get what we're talking about. Oh, and Christina, why does the urinal make you upset?
Because I feel like it's completely possible for a urinal to be art and for the lines to be beautiful and the design to be elevated. But I feel like the art is the person who designed the urinal. I feel like taking a urinal and putting it on display, maybe I just don't get it, but it's not art to me.
All right, well, let's talk about that, because on one hand, you're completely right. And on the other hand, the point is missed. It is not Marcel Duchamp's art. The urinal is not his art. And as we look at these ready-mades, this is not Jocelyn's art. That is not the art that is being presented with a ready-made. We encounter the pre-made object, but that is not the art. The art is the recontextualization and the internal dialogue that object and recontextualization generates. So, going home on an evening, walking into a demolished apartment and stealing a urinal, and then writing a pretend name on it with enamel and putting it on a pedestal the next day, that is not the art. What the art is providing an environment where people are forced to challenge their own preconceptions about what the word art means, to examine the relationship between the meaning of art and the placement or physical context of the thing, as well as the context of the title. So I don't know if that helps at all, but for a ready-made to be a really good ready-made, it needs to not be manipulated or made by the artist. It needs to be completely unchanged, because the art does not reside in the thing that's on display. It resides in the internal conversation about the thing that's on display. Does that help, Christina?
It does. It does actually. I feel better thinking about it as the art took place by creating the opportunity to sit here and look at this piece and debate it. And
Yes,
that's
exactly.
the art.
Yeah, I remember reading an article, and it may have been even on the Red Dot blog. If you guys can look up Jason Horsch, Red Dot blog, it's Xanadu Gallery is what it is, and that's XANADU Gallery in Arizona. And Jason Horsch, whose last name is spelled HORECZ, I want to say. He recounted it several years ago about overhearing a conversation. And the conversation was that somebody was just looking on as two people debated about whether the thing they were looking at was art. And it was priced ridiculously high for what apparently it was. And then the person behind the two people that were debating said, "Oh, I want to buy it." And these people turned on him and said, "Why do you want to buy it?" And he said, "Any object that is going to make two people that think they know what art is argue about what it is has value, because it's an object that is inciting, a very heartfelt conversation." And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. But this also opens the door for a conversation about, and I remember I had this with somebody about 4 years ago. A person was contracting them to build something that they had designed for inclusion in an art show. And this artist who was contracted to build it said, "Well, then it's my art, isn't it?" But the reality was this other person had designed it. It would never have existed without it existing first in their head. Yes, the one person was building it, but under the direction of the somebody else who was the artist. And so art is not always us as individuals creating from nothing this thing that we're presenting. A lot of the times, I'd argue more or less most of the time, the art that is presented that makes us the artist is how we are finalizing it, how we are presenting it, how we are creating the context for it. Because we're building a relationship between a thing and potential meaning. And I think that's what makes us as individuals become the artist. That can become a really big conversation. So I'm going to go back and we'll talk about. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I won't bring it
No,
up.
please go ahead.
I saw an article this week about a banana that is duct taped
Right.
to a board, and it is selling at Sotheby's, and they expect it to bring $1 million. And it's a real banana, so it's perishable, and you'll have to replace the tape because the tape will get damaged when the banana rots. But what you get for that $1 million is a certificate of authenticity, allowing you to reproduce that piece of art and call it the authentic piece of art. You can tape your own banana to the board to replace this banana. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
I am so glad to be living in a country where you can pay $1 million for the right to duct tape a banana to a wall. I think that is awesome.
Nice.
No, but again, this is the artist that did that original thing. They are presenting an idea. They're presenting objects within a cloud of context that creates conversation and idea within the minds of observers. It is by presenting it as a piece of art, the artist is making commentary on how we have given permission to other peoples to determine what art is, but also it forces us to reflect on what art really means. What is art? And there's lots of more that goes into it, but it is impactful, and we know it's serious because people are willing to pay that kind of money for it. Sol LeWitt was an artist that started, I believe, way back in the late 50s, early 60s, where he started out as a sculptor, I believe. And then he started generating artwork where he would list specific directions describing what is needed. And then when galleries would ask for him to contribute something, he would sell, usually with, because they would give him a grant, or they would pay for it with a grant, the gallery would. But he would sell them the right with a certificate of authenticity to follow his directions with volunteers, or they could pay whatever they wanted to do, but to follow his directions for creating an art piece. And one of the more famous ones is, the direction is basically draw non-straight lines horizontally on a board, one below another. And in some of these spaces, the surface that would be drawn on would be a big piece of paper, and others the gallery would paint an entire wall and have people come in and select their own pens and pencils to draw that line, and it would be a non-straight line. Let me see if I can. I'm going to stop sharing this and show you. Let's see if I can find an image of this. So you can see this. Okay. Okay. Oh, and of course, I'm putting in all the wrong parameters. So I can't find it right away. Usually this thing just pops up right the first search. Oh, okay, here we go. All right, this is an example of what this is. Remember, the parameters are draw non-straight lines horizontally, one below the other. And he would sell the directions, a specific set of directions with a certificate of authenticity, so that the gallery would know that, and everybody came to the gallery would know that this was an authentic original Sol LeWitt that everybody else was making. And so this is one of the iterations, and there's been lots and lots of these. So and then this was also in a notebook, so it was sold as an object when it was done. But the first person did this black line like this, and then the second person took a different color marker, did a line that was parallel to it, and they kept doing it, changing over time. And what's interesting to me is that there are iterations of this all around the world, several different ways that people have interpreted this, all sorts of different sizes, but they all followed Solowit's directions. And it's fun to see that, because then he's also engaging you with a bit of empowerment to create the object the way you want to. And you are participating in helping the artist to create an original work of art. Nobody else in the history of the world before or since will ever do exactly the same thing. And I think on one hand, that can seem like a cop-out, but on the other hand, the artist who's doing this is the first time anybody's thought of doing it in a particular way the artist is saying. And then there are a lot of derivatives where people will try to mimic that to see what happens. I remember about 20 years ago, there was a display at BYU that I particularly liked, where a woman was examining just the ways that we use time. And she would set parameters for herself, like, I will work on this project for so many hours. And one of the projects was, she wrote a sentence in cursive that said, this sentence takes exactly 48 seconds to write, and with a period. And then she wrote that over and over and over and over and over, just normal size writing, but she wrote it so many times that the entire scroll of paper is about 18 inches wide, if I remember right, but the entire scroll of paper was about 30 yards long. And the amount of time that she had arrived at to do this for was how much time we waste watching TV and social media in an average, it was month or an average semester, something like that at the time. And this was 2003, 2004, right around there. So I can only imagine that it's more now. But she did a whole collection of these kinds of things where it was repetitive behavior designed to soak up time. But then when the people that came there, I would just talk to several of the people that came through, and they said that when they actually were looking at what she was doing, it shocked them, because it made them realize that's how much time I am wasting instead of living my life. When I'm going on the social media or watching TV or whatever the useless activity is. And I'm not saying that all social media and all TV is useless. That's definitely not the case. But I know all of us have gotten to the point where we're trying to avoid washing the toilet or picking up manure in the backyard after the dogs or whatever it is. And we just get into the doom scroll where we're just flipping through our phones, finding stuff that catches our eye, not really paying attention. All of us have done that. But she really illustrated that in a very physical way. You hear, oh, I've wasted 40 hours a month on TV that I didn't need to watch. And then when you see what 40 hours looks like when you're just writing the same sentence over and over again, it becomes something very different. And that kind of exhibit, there were people that said, I don't get it, it's stupid. But the people that actually took the time to start describing what the context was, describing what they were saying, made connections. And for them, they had a really powerful and many times empowering experience, because it drove home the lessons that people are trying to teach us, and then we're trying to teach ourselves. And I think stuff like that is really fantastic. Did any of you buy that? I mean, anybody understand what I'm trying to explain?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, good. I want to continue. We have a few minutes. I want to go through the rest of these conceptual art pieces and talk about them a little bit more. This one, this one is called. I looked at this picture. I didn't really like it, but the description is toe breaker. And now it makes sense. You know, as you read it, it makes sense. The only critique I have about this is that it deserves to have a better photo. And I wonder if that might be achieved by like taking it outside and photographing it in an empty parking lot, so that all you see is the asphalt behind it, making that kind of infinity screen. I don't know if that would make it more effective, but it's something to think about. So please do go through all of these in the discussion and see what you think about each one. And I like this, the title itself. If you didn't get any of the description or didn't read any of it, knowing that the title is companion, what does that make you think of? Have any of you found yourself at 2:30 in the morning? You're the only one who's aware in the entire building. You're still working on stuff, and the only other thing you interact with is the lamp on your desk. As students, I know all of you have had that experience, but I think that this one I think it is that's a really good idea. Halted Light is the name of this. I would like this is sounds like it could be really interesting. And in some of these, the photos are solid enough that it's engaging just for itself. And in others, it really helps to have the written word next to it. And that's why I like having both of these things together in the discussion presentation that everybody's doing. This is really an interesting one. I like how I think that the photo is just interesting by itself, because these ripples in the background and the way that this appears to be filtered a little bit kind of echo, but not exactly what's going on in the bowl. So just for an image, this is an interesting image. And the title Nature's Offering really feels like it is associated with the organic nature of the bowl and that kind of fun organic way that the background is draped. Connection denied. This is really interesting. And I'm wondering with this one, it might be interesting to rephoto this on that cardboard so you get more of that infinity screen background, so that the phone itself is the only thing you see. Because I think that this background, unless this talks about why the background is, so it does. Okay, maybe the burlap. I'll have to read that. Maybe the burlap background is intrinsic to this. I am wondering about this spot or shadow on the side. I wonder if anything talks about that. This is interesting, and I'm wondering with the title "Suspended Expectations," if it might not be better to hang these one from another and display them like that, so they are hanging from each other. Maybe that might be interesting. But I like what people are doing because they're finding ordinary stuff and they're talking about the associations that this stuff has. And it's also interesting that they're really describing what a new context for it. And sometimes the objects themselves are really mundane, but then you read what the person has to say about it. It's really fascinating. This one, with the title and everything that's written about it, it might be worth also taking this out to the middle of an empty parking lot and taking a photo there. Pulling out as far as possible so the plant appears small in the parking lot setting. That might be really interesting to do. Or in a field of snow, even. As long as there's no activity around it, nothing else around it, and it's just in a blank space, that might be really make the photo more dramatic. This is really interesting. It reminds me of James Turrell, his light pieces. Even though this is a basket, a proofing basket, also known as a banneton. It has that same kind of dramatic feel that James Turrell's light sculptures have. I think that is really fascinating. That the photographing this, they focus on the light reflecting off of these rope shapes, and it makes it for a very interesting image. I think that's pretty fantastic. Well, we've looked at this before, and I love the fact that the person used the filters. And then you can also see this blue bit of shadow right here. I think that's really interesting. They used the filters to kind of emphasize the new context they gave the structure. I think that's really fascinating to me. Well, as we are winding up, do you guys have any questions about what we talked about tonight?
No, I think we've covered some interesting things, though.
All right, good. Again, I will have that Henry Moore critique video up. Please remember that when you look at something, if it's worth looking at, it's almost always worth looking at for long enough that you can think about it. And so consider that. And please keep your critiques to under 5 minutes or under, and longer than 3 minutes. So 3 to 5 minutes is the spot that we want to get to. They need to be in 2 different videos, one on a piece of art that you see somebody else has made in the class this semester, and the other on one of the objects that you made for this class this semester. Now, next week, I know it's Thanksgiving, but these things are all recorded. I will really appreciate it if whoever is able to come on to next Wednesday's class live, mention that when you do your attendance, and I will give you 2 extra credit points, which is worth every bit as much as to do teenager-driven show on the CW. Nobody really cares, but it'll be 2 extra credit points. There is something else you'll notice that I opened up an additional extra credit assignment on the last module, the module that talks about the final. On that extra credit assignment is going to do your the student rating assessment for the class, and there's a description there. Please remind me. We'll talk about that also next week, but I think it's called SRP, something like that. You can get to it if you go to your student portal in the Canvas system. There is a way where you can rate the classes that you take. And in that assignment, I describe how to get to it. And again, we will talk about it on Wednesday. So again, if you show up live Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving, and tell me that in the attendance turn-in, then you will get 2 extra credit points. All righty. I hope in the meantime, I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you have a wonderful week until I see you again, and a great and safe weekend. Nobody do anything that causes you to get arrested, please. All right. Okay, everybody, you have a good weekend and week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.